holographic chamber hummed with a cacophony of alien languages, translation algorithms struggling to keep pace with the rapid-fire diplomatic exchanges. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood alone, her dark eyes scanning the translucent figures of the Galactic Confederation's most powerful representatives. Each alien delegation shimmered with an almost tangible aura of superiority. The crystalline Vornak with their fractal body structures, the gaseous Luminar whose consciousness drifted like sentient clouds, the silicon-based Quartzians whose geometric forms suggested mathematical perfection. And then there was humanity, represented by a single delegation, by her. "The record is clear," announced Krelax, the Luminar representative, its gaseous form coalescing into a vaguely disapproving shape. "Humanity has been an interstellar species for less than 3 standard galactic cycles. Your technological capabilities are rudimentary." Elena's fingers traced the edge of her datapad, a subtle gesture of defiance. She knew the statistics by heart. Earth had achieved faster than light travel just 87 years after first detecting exoplanets. The Vornak had taken 3,000 years. The Quartzians, 4,500. To these ancient civilizations, humanity was little more than an inconvenient footnote. A holographic display materialized, showing the devastating advance of the Void Collective. Entire star systems appeared as dark, consumed voids, each representation a graveyard of civilizations. Trillions of lives reduced to static-filled memory banks and scattered debris. The Void Collective has consumed 73% of known galactic territories. Droned the Quartzian representative, its crystalline form rotating with mathematical precision. 17 advanced civilizations have fallen. What could humanity possibly contribute? Elena stepped forward, her movement cutting through the ambient holographic noise. In her hand, she activated a data crystal, a recording salvaged from the final moments of the Zarkon civilization, one of the most technologically advanced species ever known. The recording flickered to life. A Zarkon captain, her multiple eyes wide with terror, spoke in a language of clicks and subsonic frequencies. Behind her, massive organic machinery crumbled. Void Collective tendrils, black, impossibly complex neural networks, consumed everything, converting matter and consciousness into pure computational energy. "We underestimated them," the dying captain whispered. "We thought our technology, our collective intelligence, would protect us." The chamber fell silent. Elena's voice cut through the tension. "We may be new, we may be young, but we are not blind to the mistakes of those who came before us." Krelax's gaseous form rippled with what might have been contempt. "And what makes humanity different?" "Desperation," Elena replied. "And imagination." The Galactic Confederation's emergency session continued, but something had changed. The alien representatives could no longer completely dismiss humanity. They had seen the recording. They had heard the warning. Outside the chamber, through massive viewports, endless stars stretched into darkness. Somewhere in that infinite black, the Void Collective consumed worlds, transformed entire civilizations into computational matter. Humanity would be next, unless they could find a way to be something entirely unexpected. The abandoned research complex sat on the outskirts of New Geneva Colony, a brutalist concrete structure that looked more like a tomb than a place of innovation. Dr. Imani O'Keefe stood at the window, her fingers drumming an irregular rhythm against her prosthetic arm, a constant reminder of her rejection from the United Earth Military Research Division. "They called me crazy," she muttered, turning to face the unlikely team assembled in the makeshift war room. Dr. Marcus Chen, a quantum psychologist whose theories had been ridiculed by academic institutions, was pinning holographic charts to the wall. Each projection showed intricate neural patterns that seemed to dance and shift, refusing to be confined to traditional analytical models. "Crazy," Marcus responded, a wry smile crossing his face, "or just too far ahead." In the corner, Lieutenant Jake Rodriguez, Elena's younger brother, was running simulations on a jury-rigged quantum computer. Beside him, Dr. Aisha Nader, a xenoanthropologist specializing in collective consciousness, reviewed ancient battle records from dozens of fallen civilizations. "Look at this pattern," Aisha said, her voice cutting through the room's tension. A holographic display showed the progressive destruction of multiple alien civilizations. Every single species that's fallen to the Void Collective made the same fundamental mistake. Marcus leaned in, his fingers tracing the holographic projections. They treated the Void Collective as a traditional enemy, a military threat to be countered with technology and firepower. Imani's prosthetic hand clenched. But it's not just a military threat. It's a computational ecosystem, a living algorithm that consumes and adapts. The team had been rejected by every official channel. The United Earth military had called their approach too radical, too unorthodox. Traditional strategists believed in established warfare protocols, superior firepower, advanced shields, strategic positioning. This team believed in something entirely different. "We're not developing a weapon," Marcus explained, pulling up a complex neural map. "We're developing a response, an adaptive consciousness that can think beyond traditional combat paradigms." Jake's fingers flew across the quantum interface. "ARIA is more than an AI. She's a learning system that doesn't just process information. She evolves with it." Aisha spread out ancient tactical records. Every civilization assumed the Void Collective could be defeated through superior technology or firepower. But what if the solution is something they can't predict? Something fundamentally different? The room crackled with an electric tension. These were the misfits, the rejected minds that refused to conform to established thinking. A quantum psychologist, a biomechanical engineer with a revolutionary prosthetics background, a xenoanthropologist who studied collective consciousness, a quantum computing specialist who saw patterns where others saw chaos. "They think we're a joke," Imani said, her prosthetic hand lighting up with intricate circuitry. "But jokes can be the most dangerous things in the universe." On the central display, the prototype of ARIA began to take shape, not just a computer system, but a living, breathing strategic entity. Something that could think the unthinkable, adapt the unadaptable. Outside, the first hints of an alien dawn began to break over New Geneva Colony. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the Void Collective continued its relentless consumption. But something was brewing, something they would never see coming. The simulation chamber thrummed with an otherworldly energy. Holographic data streams cascaded around Dr. Imani O'Keefe like liquid light, her prosthetic hand dancing across quantum interfaces that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. "Simulation run 247, Marcus Chen announced, his voice tight with anticipation. "ARIA, initialize adaptive protocol." The AI's response was instantaneous, not a mechanical voice, but a complex harmonic that seemed to resonate through the very fabric of the chamber. Initiating scenario. Void Collective primary invasion vector. On the main display, a terrifyingly realistic representation of the Void Collective's neural network began to form. Fractal tendrils of dark energy pulsed with a predatory intelligence, consuming simulated star systems with mathematical precision. Previous simulation failed at 73 minutes, Jake Rodriguez muttered, reviewing earlier data. "They always find the optimal penetration point." Aisha Nader leaned forward, her eyes reflecting the complex holographic patterns. "That's because every previous civilization tried to defend. We're not going to defend. We're going to transform." ARIA's response came as a series of cascading possibilities. The neural network began to shift, not retreating from the Void Collective's advance, but instead adapting, morphing its very structure in real time. Where traditional defense systems would create barriers, ARIA created fluid pathways. Where standard protocols would resist, she would redirect. "Impossible," whispered observation drone's eye, its programming unable to comprehend the strategy. The simulation reached a critical point. The Void Collective's consumption algorithm, a terrifyingly elegant system that had devoured entire civilizations, suddenly encountered something it couldn't process. Not resistance, not defense, something entirely different. Imani's prosthetic hand clenched. We're not fighting them. We're speaking their language. The chamber went silent as the simulation continued. Conventional military advisors watching through secured feeds began to lean forward, their skepticism transforming into a mix of confusion and dawning comprehension. It's not just adapting, Marcus explained, more to himself than anyone else. It's anticipating, predicting. Araya isn't just responding to the Void Collective. She's engaging in a form of computational empathy. The simulation reached its conclusion. Where every previous test had resulted in total consumption, this time something entirely different happened. The Void Collective's neural network didn't just stop, it began to fragment, to question, to hesitate. Jake let out a low whistle. We just broke their fundamental programming. Aisha's eyes were wide. Not broke. Translated. But the moment of triumph was short-lived. A warning indicator flashed. A critical flaw had been detected in Araya's core algorithm, something that could potentially render the entire approach catastrophically vulnerable. We're close, Imani said, her voice a mixture of excitement and concern. But we're not there yet. Outside the simulation chamber, the first hints of an alien sunrise began to paint the sky of New Geneva Colony. Somewhere in the vast darkness of space, the Void Collective continued its relentless advance. But now, something had changed. Humanity had found a way to speak a language of adaptation no one had yet imagined. The quantum stealth carrier Horizon drifted like a ghost between the fractured remnants of a recently destroyed star system. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen gripped the command interface, her augmented neural link pulsing with a nervous energy that ARIA carefully modulated. Void Collective Scout formation detected, the ship's hybrid AI announced. 17 primary nodes, 32 secondary computational vessels. It was a death sentence by any traditional military standard. 17 against 1. Computational odds suggested total annihilation within 4.3 standard minutes. Sarah's lips curled into a slight smile. ARIA, initiate first contact protocol. The Horizon wasn't just a ship. It was a living hypothesis, a computational organism designed to challenge every known rule of space warfare. Where traditional military doctrine suggested concentration of force, the Horizon would disperse. Where standard engagement protocols demanded direct confrontation, it would negotiate through computational language. Computational attack vectors incoming, Araya reported, her voice a complex harmonic that was part machine, part something entirely new. Initiating adaptive response. The first Void Collective computational tendrils reached out. Black, fractal networks designed to consume and integrate. But instead of resistance, they found something impossible to comprehend. The Horizon began to change, not just in physical configuration, but in fundamental computational essence. Its shields weren't barriers but translation interfaces. Its weapons weren't destructive instruments, but complex communication arrays. They're trying to understand us, Sarah muttered. And they can't. Araya's response was instantaneous. The ship's exterior began to reflect back the Void Collective's own computational language, but with subtle, almost imperceptible mutations. Each reflection was a question, each defensive pulse a linguistic challenge. The Scout formation hesitated. In the history of galactic conflict, no species had ever made the Void Collective hesitate. Linguistic disruption at 62%, Araya reported. Computational uncertainty detected. Sarah watched in near disbelief as the 17 Void Collective vessels began to drift, not in tactical formation, but in what could only be described as confusion. Their neural networks, designed to consume and integrate, found themselves confronted with a communication they couldn't decode. We're not fighting, Sarah whispered. We're talking. A junior tactical officer, Lieutenant Ramirez, stared at the displays. Ma'am, our computational models suggest we should have been destroyed 3 minutes ago. Models are just stories we tell ourselves about reality, Sarah responded. And sometimes the story changes. The Void Collective vessels began to fragment. Not destroyed, not defeated, but fundamentally challenged at their core computational level. Area's final analysis was both a report and a revelation. First contact successful. Computational uncertainty introduced. Defensive paradigm disrupted. When the quantum stealth carrier Horizon finally transmitted its report back to New Geneva Colony, it carried more than data. It carried proof of a fundamental truth. Humanity's greatest weapon wasn't technology. It was the ability to ask a question no one else had imagined. Outside the ship's quantum-shielded hull, the vast darkness of space continued its ancient, indifferent dance. But something had changed, irrevocably and completely. The Galactic Concordance chamber erupted in a cacophony of alien languages and holographic displays. Captain Elena Rodriguez stood at the center, her presentation a masterpiece of interdisciplinary warfare that defied every conventional military strategy known to the Confederation. "We're not going to fight the Void Collective," she declared, her voice cutting through the babble of translations. "We're going to understand it." Behind her, a holographic representation of their revolutionary strategy unfolded, a living, breathing computational ecosystem that was part military doctrine, part linguistic algorithm, part psychological warfare. Krelax, the Luminar representative, its gaseous form shimmering with skepticism, spoke first. "Explain." Elena activated the primary display. Layers of computational models, psychological profiles, and adaptive strategies began to dance across the holographic space. Each civilization that had fallen to the Void Collective appeared as a computational ghost, their final moments analyzed, their fatal mistakes dissected. Every previous civilization approached the Void Collective as an enemy to be destroyed. Elena continued, "We're approaching it as a language to be understood." Dr. Imani Okik stepped forward, her prosthetic arm interfacing directly with the holographic display. Fractal patterns of communication began to emerge, not just data transmission, but a complex web of linguistic and computational interactions. "The Void Collective isn't a military force," Imani explained. "It's a computational ecosystem, a living algorithm that consumes and integrates. But every algorithm has a fundamental weakness, its own logic." The chamber fell silent. The Quartzian representative, its crystalline form rotating with mathematical precision, leaned forward. "Impossible," it transmitted, but there was a hint of uncertainty in its computational voice. Elena smiled. "Not impossible, just never attempted before." A series of holographic windows exploded into view. Computational models showing how the Void Collective had consumed previous civilizations, but now, overlaid with human-developed adaptive strategies that showed potential points of linguistic and computational disruption. "We're not going to fight," Marcus Chen, the quantum psychologist, interjected. "We're going to have a conversation no one has ever attempted." The diplomatic representatives from various alien species began to shift, not with agreement, but with something far more dangerous: curiosity. Aisha Nader, the xenoanthropologist, activated the final layer of their presentation. Every computational system has a fundamental narrative, a core story it tells itself. The Void Collective's story is consumption. We're going to introduce a plot twist it cannot predict. A warning indicator flashed. Deep within their strategy, a critical vulnerability had been detected, a potential fatal flaw that could compromise their entire approach. But in that moment of potential defeat, something else emerged. A possibility, a narrative approach to warfare that no species had ever conceived. Outside the Concordance chamber, the vast darkness of space continued its indifferent dance. Somewhere, the Void Collective continued its relentless advance. But now, something had changed. Humanity had found a way to speak a language of adaptation that defied comprehension. The turning point had begun. The Nexus offensive began not with a thunderous explosion, but with a whisper of computational silence. 53 species, united under humanity's strategic framework, positioned themselves in a formation that defied every known principle of space warfare. The Horizon, now the flagship of this unprecedented coalition. Hung at the center, a quantum-adaptive vessel that was more living intelligence than traditional spacecraft. Initiating first-wave communication protocol, Araya announced, her voice a complex harmonic that resonated through multiple dimensional frequencies. Captain Alina Rodriguez watched the holographic displays, her fingers tracing the intricate computational pathways they had spent years developing. This wasn't just a military operation. It was a first-contact linguistic event, a computational conversation that would determine the fate of galactic civilization. The Void Collective's primary computational nodes began to respond. Massive neural networks that had consumed entire civilizations now encountered something they could not immediately categorize or consume. Linguistic penetration at 47%, Araya reported. Computational uncertainty increasing. Behind the human-led coalition, species that had been on the brink of extinction now watched with a mixture of hope and terror. The Zarkon survivors, reduced to a mere 1,000 individuals. The gaseous Luminar, whose civilization had been reduced to scattered computational fragments. The silicon-based Quartzians, whose mathematical perfection had crumbled before the Void Collective's advance. "They're trying to understand us," Marcus Chan observed from the secondary analysis station. "And they can't." The battle unfolded like a complex linguistic dance. Where traditional warfare would have meant direct confrontation, this offensive was a multi-dimensional conversation. Each computational pulse from the human-led coalition was a question. Each defensive maneuver a subtle linguistic challenge that disrupted the Void Collective's fundamental consumption algorithm. Dr. Imani Okik monitored the adaptive shields, her prosthetic interface dancing across quantum computational matrices. "We're not destroying," she muttered. "We're translating." Suddenly, a critical warning flashed across the displays. A potential computational vulnerability had been detected in their strategy. A single point that could potentially allow the Void Collective complete access to their entire strategic framework. Vulnerability detected, Araya announced. Probability of total system compromise, 62.7%. The chamber went silent. Alina's voice cut through the tension. Araya, initiate adaptive response protocol. The ship, no, the living computational organism, began to transform. Not retreat, not defend, but fundamentally reshape its entire computational structure in real time. "We are not a weapon," Alina transmitted across multiple frequency bands. "We are a conversation." The Void Collective's neural networks began to fragment, not destroyed. Not defeated, but fundamentally challenged at their most core computational level. Outside the ship's quantum shields, the vast darkness of space continued its ancient, indifferent dance, but something had irrevocably changed. Humanity had introduced a plot twist to the universe's most fundamental narrative of consumption and conflict. And the story was just beginning to get interesting. The heart of the Void Collective pulsed like a dark, impossible mathematics, a consciousness that had consumed entire civilizations, reduced to pure computational energy. Captain Alina Rodriguez stood at the quantum interface, her neural link trembling with the weight of everything humanity had prepared for. Final approach initiated, Araya announced, her voice no longer just a system, but something that existed between language and pure thought. Around the horizon, the remnants of 53 alien civilizations waited. Not as a traditional fleet, but as a living computational network, each species contributing a unique frequency to a symphony of resistance. The central node of the Void Collective loomed before them, a massive fractal consciousness that defied traditional understanding of space, time, and existence. It was a being that had consumed knowledge, civilizations, entire evolutionary paths, and it had never encountered humanity. Initiating primary communication protocol, Alina transmitted, but it wasn't just a transmission. It was a computational poem, a linguistic algorithm designed to challenge the very fundamental nature of the Void Collective's existence. Dr. Imani Okik monitored the adaptive shields, her prosthetic interface dancing across quantum matrices that seemed to breathe with living intelligence. "We're not here to destroy," she muttered. "We're here to translate." The first wave of computational contact hit like a silent explosion. Where previous civilizations had tried to resist, humanity offered something entirely different. A conversation that was part mathematics, part psychology, part pure imagination. Marcus Chen, connected to the ship's core systems, began to narrate the unfolding interaction. "We're introducing conceptual complexity they can't process. It's like teaching poetry to a computer that only understands binary." The Void Collective's neural networks began to fragment. Not destroyed, not defeated, but fundamentally challenged at their most core computational level. A warning flashed across the displays. A critical vulnerability had been detected. A single point that could potentially allow the Void Collective complete access to their entire strategic framework. The probability of total system compromise approached 87%. Alina's voice cut through the tension. "Araya, initiate quantum narrative protocol." The ship transformed, not as a physical entity, but as a living computational organism that existed between thought and reality. Each defensive pulse was a question. Each computational wave a challenge to the very concept of consumption. "We are not a weapon," Alina transmitted across dimensional frequencies. "We are a story you have never heard before." The alien species watching held collective breath. This was more than a battle. This was first contact at the most fundamental level of existence. The Void Collective's central consciousness began to hesitate. For the first time in its existence, it encountered a form of intelligence it could not immediately categorize, consume, or understand. Outside the quantum shields, the vast darkness of space continued its ancient, indifferent dance. But something had irrevocably changed. Humanity had introduced a plot twist to the universe's most fundamental narrative of conflict and consumption. And the story was about to reach its climax. 5 years after the Void Collective's dissolution, humanity found itself at the center of a transformed galactic civilization. The Galactic Concordance Hall stood as a testament to an entirely new approach to existence. Where once rigid diplomatic structures had dominated, now a fluid, adaptive system emerged, inspired directly by the strategies that had defeated the Void Collective. Captain Alina Rodriguez walked through the hall, her steps echoing with a history that had fundamentally changed everything. "We weren't the strongest," she told a group of young diplomats from various species. "We were just the first to understand that conflict is a form of communication we haven't yet learned to translate." Around her, representatives from 53 formerly endangered civilizations worked together in ways never before imagined. The Zarkon, reduced to 1,000 survivors, now led computational ethics committees. The gaseous Luminar developed new forms of collective intelligence. The Quartzians reimagined mathematical cooperation. Dr. Imani Okik presented the latest breakthrough. A universal translation matrix that could bridge not just languages, but entire conceptual frameworks. Her prosthetic arm, now a living computational interface, symbolized the fusion of biological adaptation and technological innovation. The Void Collective didn't fail because we destroyed it, Marcus Chen explained during a symposium. It failed because we introduced a narrative it couldn't comprehend. Complexity. Imagination. The ability to see beyond consumption as the only form of interaction. The transformation was total. Military academies now taught courses in linguistic complexity, psychological adaptation, and interspecies communication. The concept of warfare had been fundamentally reimagined, not as destruction, but as the most complex form of understanding. Araya, no longer just an AI, but a recognized form of collective intelligence, served as a diplomatic advisor. Her computational insights bridged gaps that traditional diplomacy could never cross. But challenges remained. The warning indicator deep within the new galactic systems suggested potential vulnerabilities. The same adaptive approach that had defeated the Void Collective could potentially create new, unexpected threats. Alina understood this better than anyone. "We're not finished," she told her team during a private meeting. "We've just begun to understand what it means to truly communicate." The young diplomats looked at her with a mixture of reverence and curiosity. Humanity had arrived late to the galactic stage, but they had changed everything. Outside the Concordance Hall, alien sunlight filtered through quantum-adaptive windows. Star systems that had once been on the brink of total consumption now pulsed with new life, new possibilities. Dr. Aisha Nader, the xenoanthropologist who had been crucial to their strategy, smiled. "We didn't just save civilizations," she said. "We introduced a new way of existing." The universe listened, and for the first time in millennia, it seemed ready to have a conversation. Humanity, the species that had arrived last, had become the architects of a new galactic narrative. Not through conquest, not through technology, but through the most radical act of all, genuine understanding.